Jessica Harris's handcuffs bit into her wrists as four Chicago police officers dragged her through the marble lobby of Mitchell Tower. Her uniform, the blue one she'd worn while cleaning floors for 3 years, was soaked with sweat and melting snow. She stole $2.3 million in diamonds from Mr. Mitchell's private vault, Security Director Richard Caldwell announced, holding up a velvet bag. Caught her red-handed in the basement. I didn't touch anything. Jessica's voice cracked. I was just cleaning. The cameras malfunctioned. Only you were down there. Caldwell's smile was cruel. Outside, 5-year-old Sophie ran after the patrol car, her pink coat no match for the blizzard. Mama didn't do it, Mama. Jessica pressed against the window. Sophie, go to Mrs. Miller's now. The car pulled away. Sophie stood alone in the snow, shivering. She knocked on Mrs. Miller's door. No answer. Mrs. Miller had died 2 hours ago. Nobody knew. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The interrogation room smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Jessica sat in a metal chair, her hands still cuffed, her lips turning purple from the cold that had seeped into her bones during the 20-minute drive to the precinct. Her wet hair dripped onto the scarred table. Ms. Harris? Detective Morgan slid a folder across the table. You were found in possession of stolen diamonds worth $2.3 million. Care to explain? I didn't take anything. Jessica's voice trembled. I was cleaning the basement stairwell like I do every Thursday night. Someone must have put that bag in my cart. I never saw it until Mr. Caldwell, the security director who's worked for Mitchell Properties for 8 years. Morgan raised an eyebrow. Versus a cleaning lady who's been there 3 years and has access to every floor. I have a daughter, a 5-year-old daughter who's home alone right now. Please, I need to call someone to check on her. Morgan's expression didn't soften. Ms. Harris, you're being held for 48 hours pending arraignment. No phone calls until you're processed. We've already contacted Child Protective Services. The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. What? Standard procedure when a single parent is arrested. A caseworker will go to your residence at 9 p.m. tonight to collect the child. Jessica's world tilted. No. You don't understand. Sophie doesn't know what's happening. She saw them take me. She's probably terrified. The social worker will handle it professionally. She won't be there. Jessica lunged forward, the cuffs rattling against the table. Sophie ran after the police car. I told her to go to Mrs. Miller's apartment, our neighbor, but Mrs. Miller might not answer. It's late. And the blizzard. Morgan stood. We'll send an officer to check on her. Give me the address. Jessica rattled off the information, her mind racing. 48 hours. If she was in custody for 48 hours, Sophie would be placed in emergency foster care. And if she was convicted, if she was convicted, she'd lose custody permanently. They'd take her baby away forever. Please, she whispered. Please, just let me make one call. One call to make sure my daughter is safe. After processing, Morgan left the room. Jessica dropped her head onto the cold table and tried not to scream. 12 blocks east, Sophie stood outside Mrs. Miller's door, knocking for the 20th time. Her small fist was red and raw. Mrs. Miller, it's Sophie. Please open up. Silence. The hallway of the subsidized housing complex was dim and cold. The radiator clanked but provided no heat. Sophie's thin pink coat was soaked through, and she couldn't stop shivering. She tried the doorknob. Locked. Through the grimy window at the end of the hall, she could see the blizzard intensifying. Snow swirled like angry ghosts. The weather report that morning had called it a historic winter storm, whatever that meant. Sophie walked back to her own apartment 3B and tried the door. Also locked. Mama had the keys. She sat down in the hallway, pulling her knees to her chest, hugging her teddy bear tight. Mr. Buttons was wet and cold, but he was all she had. Mama's coming back, she whispered to the bear. Mama always comes back. But Mama had never been taken away by police before. Mama had never left her alone this long. Sophie thought about the building where Mama worked. The tall one, the one Mama said was the biggest in the neighborhood, with the name Mitchell in big silver letters. "If Mama's not coming home," Sophie said to Mr. Buttons, "maybe Mama's still there. Maybe Mama needs help." She stood up, her decision made. She knew the way Mama had walked it with her before when the bus broke down. Straight down Clark Street, past the grocery store, past the library, all the way to the tall building. It was far, really far. But Mama was there. Mama needed her. Sophie pulled her coat tight and walked toward the stairwell. At the police station, Detective Morgan returned to the interrogation room. "Ms. Harris, we sent an officer to check on your daughter. Mrs. Miller, your neighbor, is deceased. Appears to be a stroke, several hours ago. And your apartment is empty. Your daughter isn't there." Jessica's blood turned to ice. "What?" "We've issued an alert for a missing child. 5 years old. Last seen wearing a pink coat." "Oh, God. Oh, God. No." Jessica stood so fast the chair fell backward. "She's out there, in the storm, looking for me. She's going to try to find me. Where would she go? Mitchell Tower, where I work. She knows that's where I was tonight." Jessica grabbed Morgan's arm. "Please, you have to find her. It's 12 blocks in a blizzard. She's 5 years old. She'll freeze to death." Morgan was already moving toward the door, radio in hand. But outside, the blizzard had intensified to whiteout conditions, and Sophie Harris was already 6 blocks into her journey. Sophie's legs burned. Her lungs felt like they were filled with ice. She'd walked stumbled, really for what felt like hours, though the clock on the bank she passed said it had only been 45 minutes. The blizzard screamed around her. Snow stung her face like tiny needles. Her hands were numb inside her thin gloves. Mr. Buttons was frozen solid, his fur crusted with ice. But there, through the swirling white, she saw it. The tall building with the silver letters, Mitchell. Sophie pushed through the revolving door and collapsed onto the marble floor of the lobby. Warm air hit her like a wall. She gasped, coughing, trying to catch her breath. Her whole body shook violently. "Jesus Christ, there's a kid!" Sophie looked up. A security guard was running toward her. But not just any guard, she recognized him. The nice man who sometimes gave Mama coffee when she worked late. The one with the kind smile? Richard Caldwell. Richard skidded to a stop when he saw Sophie's face. For just a second, so quick, Sophie almost missed it. His expression changed. The kindness vanished, replaced by something cold. Then the smile was back. "Sophie." He knelt down, his voice dripping with concern. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? You're freezing." Mama," Sophie chattered. "Mama didn't come home. I'm scared." Richard's mind raced behind those concerned eyes. This was bad. Very bad. If this child told anyone that her mother had been arrested, if she mentioned Jessica Harris, people would start asking questions. And questions would lead to investigations. Investigations would reveal that the private vault Richard had mentioned didn't exist. That the diamonds he'd found in Jessica's bag were the same ones that had gone missing 2 weeks ago. That he'd planted them. The whole plan would unravel, unless he controlled the narrative. Unless Sophie Harris disappeared long enough for Jessica to be convicted and sent away. "Oh, honey." Richard pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around Sophie's shoulders. "You poor thing. You must be so worried about your mama. Come with me, let's get you somewhere warm, and I'll help you find her. Okay?" Sophie nodded, trusting. He was a security guard. Mama said security guards helped people. Richard picked her up. She weighed almost nothing and carried her past the main desk, past the elevators, toward the private corridor that led to the basement parking garage. The night receptionist looked up, but Richard waved her off. Found a lost kid outside. Calling child services now. The receptionist nodded and went back to her phone. Richard carried Sophie down the concrete stairs to the basement level. His van was parked in the far corner, away from the cameras. A black van with no company logo. No identifying marks. He'd bought it with cash 3 months ago for exactly this kind of contingency. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked, her voice small. "Just to my van, sweetheart. It's warmer there, and I have some hot chocolate in a thermos. Then I'll call someone to help find your mama." But Richard wasn't going to call anyone. He was going to drive Sophie to a storage unit he rented in Gary, Indiana. Lock her in with some blankets and food. Keep her there for a week. Maybe 2. Long enough for Jessica to be convicted. Long enough for the story to die down. Then he'd make an anonymous call to police about a found child. By then, Jessica would be in prison, and Richard would be long gone with the diamonds. He reached the van and opened the back door. Inside, he'd already prepared blankets, bottles of water, some granola bars. It looked almost caring, almost innocent. "Hop in, Sophie. Just for a minute while I..." Caldwell. Richard froze. The voice came from behind him, echoing across the parking garage. Deep, authoritative, surprised. Richard turned, still holding Sophie. James Mitchell stood 20 feet away, having just stepped out of the private elevator that connected to his penthouse office. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Richard made in a month. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour. The billionaire's eyes moved from Richard to the child in his arms to the open van. "What's going on?" James walked closer, his footsteps clicking on the concrete. Richard's mouth went dry. Of all the people, at all the times Mitchell never came down to the parking garage himself. He always had drivers, assistants, people to handle the mundane task of retrieving vehicles. "Mr. Mitchell," Richard forced his voice to stay calm. I found this little girl in the lobby. She wandered in from the storm. I was going to call Child Protective Services." "In your personal van?" James's eyes narrowed. "Why not use the security office?" The heating's broken up there. Thought she'd be warmer down here while I made the calls." James looked at Sophie, really looked at her. She was shivering despite the jacket, her face red from cold, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Something about her, the determination in those young eyes, the way she clutched that frozen teddy bear made his chest tighten. "What's your name, sweetheart?" James crouched down to Sophie's level, his tone gentle. "Sophie Harris." Her voice was barely a whisper. "My mama didn't come home. She works here. She cleans. Her name is Jessica Harris." James felt something click in his memory. Earlier that evening, how long ago now? 2 hours there'd been a commotion. Police in the building. Security had handled it. Something about an employee being arrested for theft. Jessica Harris. He looked back at Richard. "Isn't Harris the woman who was arrested tonight?" Richard's smile tightened. "Yes, sir." "Unfortunate situation. That's why the child is here, probably confused. Looking for her mother." "And you were planning to take her where exactly in your unmarked van?" "Sir, I was just trying to help by putting her in your personal vehicle away from cameras." James stood, his full 6'2" frame suddenly imposing. "Step away from the van, Caldwell." "Mr. Mitchell, I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly." James's voice dropped to a tone that had made corporate rivals back down. "Put the child down. Now." Richard hesitated. For a moment, James saw something dangerous flash across the man's face. Calculation, fury, desperation. Then it vanished behind the mask of the helpful employee. Richard set Sophie down gently. "Of course, sir. I was only trying to go to my office. Top floor. Wait for me there." James didn't take his eyes off Richard. "I'll need you to pull the personnel file for Jessica Harris. And the security footage from tonight. All of it. Richard couldn't refuse. Not without making things worse. Not with James Mitchell staring him down like a predator who'd just scented blood. Yes, sir. Richard walked toward the elevator, his mind racing. He'd have to move fast, delete more footage, plant more evidence, escalate before Mitchell dug too deep. As soon as Richard disappeared into the elevator, James turned to Sophie and knelt again. Sophie, I'm James Mitchell. I own this building. Your mama works for me. He spoke slowly, carefully. Can you tell me what happened? Sophie's lower lip trembled. The police came. They took Mama. She yelled at me to go to Mrs. Miller's, but Mrs. Miller didn't answer, and I got scared, and Mama always said she works at the big Mitchell building, so I walked here to find her. But that man said he'd help me find her, but she stopped, gulping air. But something felt wrong, James finished gently. Sophie nodded. James looked at the van, the open back door, the blankets inside, the isolated location. Everything about it screamed wrong. And suddenly, he realized Richard Caldwell, his head of security for 8 years, had just tried to kidnap a child, which meant the arrest of Jessica Harris, the theft accusation. All of it was connected. All of it was a lie. James Mitchell carried Sophie into the private elevator, wrapping his suit jacket around her small frame. She was so cold she'd stopped shivering, a dangerous sign. He needed to get her warm, fast. Helen, he spoke into his phone as the elevator climbed. I need you in my office immediately. Bring blankets, hot tea, and call Dr. Reeves. Tell him it's urgent, but not life-threatening. A child with possible hypothermia. Sophie looked up at him with those enormous eyes. Are you going to help my mama? Yes, James said, and he meant it. The elevator opened onto the 78th floor. His office suite was empty except for the lingering smell of champagne and catered food from the holiday party that had ended an hour ago. Through the windows, Chicago glittered below them, the blizzard making the city lights blur like watercolors. Helen appeared within 2 minutes, his house manager for 20 years, a woman who'd raised 4 children of her own and never asked unnecessary questions. She took one look at Sophie and went into mother mode, wrapping the child in heated blankets and coaxing warm liquid into her. James stepped into his private office and made 3 phone calls. First, to his head legal counsel, Marcus Webb. I need everything about an arrest tonight. Jessica Harris, my employee, alleged theft. I want the police report, the evidence list, and I want to know who the arresting officers were. Second, to David Brennan, a former FBI agent who now ran a private investigation firm. David, I need you at Mitchell Tower in 20 minutes. I have a situation. Third, to the police station. This is James Mitchell. I understand you're holding one of my employees, Jessica Harris. I'm posting bail immediately. Whatever the amount. The desk sergeant sounded surprised. Mr. Mitchell? Bail hasn't been set yet. She won't see a judge until Monday morning. Then I want to speak with the detective in charge. That would be Detective Morgan. Hold, please. Morgan came on the line, his voice gruff. Mr. Mitchell. Didn't expect to hear from you personally. Jessica Harris works in my building. What's she being charged with? Theft of diamonds valued at $2.3 million from your private vault in the basement, according to your security director, Richard Caldwell. James's jaw tightened. I don't have a private vault in the basement. Silence on the other end. Then, excuse me. I said I don't have a vault in the basement. I don't store diamonds in my building. I don't even own diamonds worth that amount. Detective, I think you need to hear this. Richard Caldwell is lying. Mr. Mitchell, we have physical evidence. The diamonds were found in Ms. Harris's possession, in a bag that Caldwell claims came from a vault that doesn't exist. James paced the length of his office. Detective, Jessica Harris's 5-year-old daughter just walked 12 blocks through a blizzard looking for her mother. She's in my office right now, half frozen. That same security director just tried to put her in his personal van in an isolated parking garage. Does any of this sound like standard procedure to you? Morgan was quiet for a moment. Where's Caldwell now? I sent him to my office to pull files. but I'm starting to think that was a mistake. Don't let him leave. I'm sending officers. Detective. About Jessica. I'll talk to the prosecutor about emergency bail, given these new circumstances. But Mr. Mitchell, if you're wrong about this, I'm not wrong. James hung up and walked back to the outer office. Sophie was wrapped in blankets, sipping hot chocolate that Helen had somehow procured. Her color was returning. David Brennan arrived 18 minutes later, a compact man with observant eyes and the kind of face that people forgot easily useful in his line of work. James briefed him quickly. I need you to pull every piece of security footage from tonight, every camera angle. I want to know where Caldwell went, what he did, and who he talked to. You think he's running a con? I think he framed a single mother for a crime that didn't happen, and I want to know why. David nodded and left for the security office. 30 minutes later, Marcus Webb arrived with news. I got the police report, and the diamonds were allegedly found in Jessica's cleaning cart in a velvet bag. The security footage shows her in the basement at the time of the alleged theft. But here's the interesting part. The cameras malfunctioned for exactly 30 minutes. The only footage they have is her entering and exiting. Convenient, James said darkly. There's more. I did some digging. 3 weeks ago, Mitchell Properties was contracted to secure a diamond shipment for a client. Value approximately $8 million. The shipment arrived safely, but 2 weeks ago, there was a discrepancy in the inventory. Some stones went missing. James's eyes narrowed. Who was in charge of that security? Richard Caldwell. Everything clicked into place. Caldwell had stolen the diamonds. He'd needed a fall guy. Jessica Harris, a cleaning woman with no resources, no connections, no way to defend herself, was the perfect target. At 11 p.m., Jessica was released on emergency bail of $500,000, which James posted without hesitation. She walked out of the police station looking like she'd aged 10 years in 5 hours. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands shaking. James was waiting in his car. Ms. Harris, your daughter is safe. She's with my house manager. Jessica's knees buckled. James caught her arm. Sophie, how did you? She came looking for you. Long story. Get in. I'll explain everything. The drive to James's penthouse was quiet except for Jessica's occasional sob of relief. When they arrived, Sophie launched herself at her mother with a scream of joy. James watched them hold each other and felt something crack in his chest. How long had it been since anyone had loved him like that? His ex-wife had left him 5 years ago, calling him emotionally unavailable. His father had died angry at him for choosing business over family. His mother had passed when he was 20. He'd built an empire, and somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten what he was building it for. Thank you, Jessica whispered, looking at him over Sophie's head. I don't know how to repay. You don't need to repay anything. You were set up, and I'm going to prove it. Over the next hour, David Brennan arrived with preliminary findings. I pulled the footage. There's definitely tampering. Professional grade. But I found something interesting. Look at this. He showed them a clip from 3 weeks ago. Richard Caldwell, alone in the vault room, handling a shipment of diamonds. The timestamp showed he was there for 47 minutes, alone. He had access and opportunity, David said. But we need more. We need to prove he planted the evidence on Jessica. James thought for a moment. Then he made a decision. I'm hiring you, Ms. Harris. Jessica blinked. What? I need a house manager. Someone to oversee my domestic staff, manage the household accounts, coordinate events. It pays $80,000 a year, plus benefits, plus housing. The guest house on my estate is included. Mr. Mitchell. I clean floors. I don't manage. You've been managing a household and raising a daughter on 3 jobs and $400. I think you can handle my staff. He paused. And frankly, I need you close. If Caldwell realizes you're free, you and Sophie could be in danger. My estate has security. You'll be safe there. Jessica looked at Sophie, then back at James. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Because your daughter walked through a blizzard to find you. Because someone tried to destroy your life to cover their own crimes. Because he stopped, surprised by his own honesty. Because it's the right thing to do, and I haven't done the right thing in a very long time. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. I accept. That night, as Jessica and Sophie settled into the guest house, James stood in his study reviewing the evidence David had collected. Everything pointed to Caldwell. Everything made sense. Except for one detail. James pulled up the employee file for Richard Caldwell. Hired 8 years ago. Impeccable record. References from 3 previous security firms. James dug deeper, pulling up the man's background check from when he'd been hired. And there it was. Previous name, Richard Thomas Caldwell. Father Thomas Caldwell. James's blood ran cold. Thomas Caldwell. The name hit him like a freight train. 20 years ago, James had been a junior partner at his father's real estate firm. Thomas Caldwell had been the senior accountant, and James had been the one to discover Thomas was embezzling funds. James had reported him. Thomas had been arrested, convicted, sent to prison. 2 years into his sentence, Thomas Caldwell had hanged himself in his cell. James had never thought about it again. One more necessary business decision. But Richard Caldwell had thought about it for 20 years. And 8 years ago, he'd gotten a job with James Mitchell. This wasn't just about stolen diamonds. This was revenge. The next morning, James called an emergency meeting with his legal team and David Brennan. They gathered in his home office while Jessica made breakfast with Sophie in the kitchen, a scene so domestic it made James's chest ache. We have a problem, David said, spreading photographs across the conference table. I tracked Caldwell's movements over the past 3 months. He's been careful, but not perfect. Look at this. The photo showed Richard meeting with someone in a parking garage. The angle was wrong to see the other person's face, but the body language suggested familiarity, partnership. Who is that? James leaned closer. I don't know yet, but whoever it is, they met 7 times in the past 2 months, always in locations with no cameras. Marcus Webb, James's lawyer, cleared his throat. James, I need to tell you something. The prosecutor isn't backing down. Even with your testimony about the vault, they're moving forward. They claim you might be covering for Jessica. That's absurd. Is it a billionaire posts $500,000 bail for his cleaning lady, then immediately hires her for a high-paying position she's not qualified for, then moves her into his guest house? Marcus spread his hands. It looks suspicious. They're suggesting you and Jessica might have been in on the theft together. James felt his temper rising. I know it's not true, but optics matter. The media is already picking up the story. Billionaire's secret relationship with accused thief. It's going to get ugly. Before James could respond, his phone rang. Detective Morgan. Mr. Mitchell, we have a warrant to search Ms. Harris's apartment and your guest house. On what grounds? New evidence has come to light. We'll be there in 20 minutes. James hung up and immediately went to warn Jessica. She was flipping pancakes while Sophie drew at the kitchen table, both of them looking more relaxed than they had in days. Jessica, the police are coming. They have a search warrant. The spatula clattered to the floor. What? Why? I don't know, but they said new evidence. James looked at Sophie, then back at Jessica. Is there anything in your apartment that could be used against you? Anything at all? No, I didn't take anything. I don't have anything. 23 minutes later, 4 police officers arrived with Detective Morgan. James stood beside Jessica as they searched the guest house methodically, professionally, finding nothing. Then they went to Jessica's apartment. James, Jessica, and Sophie waited in the car while the search happened. Through the windows of the 3rd-floor unit, they could see flashlights sweeping through rooms. 45 minutes passed. Then Detective Morgan emerged, holding an evidence bag. Inside it, clearly visible, was Sophie's teddy bear, Mr. Buttons. And stuffed inside the bear were 5 diamonds. glittering even through the plastic. No. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. No, that's not possible. Morgan approached the car. Ms. Harris, you're under arrest for possession of stolen property and grand theft. This time, there will be no bail. Those weren't there. Jessica's voice rose to a scream. Someone put them there. Someone. Mama. Sophie's voice was small and terrified. James stepped between Morgan and Jessica. Detective, that bear hasn't left my property since yesterday. Someone had to have planted. Mr. Mitchell, I suggest you step back. We have evidence from 2 separate locations now. The pattern is clear. The pattern is that someone is framing her. But Morgan wasn't listening. He was reading Jessica her rights. Sophie started to cry. That's my bear. Nobody touched my bear except Mama and... She stopped, her eyes going wide with a child's sudden memory. The nice security man at the tower, he asked to see Mr. Buttons. He said Mr. Buttons was pretty and could he hold him for a second. James's blood went cold. When did this happen? Sophie. When I came to find Mama. Before you came. The nice man in the uniform. Richard Caldwell. He'd held Sophie's bear, which meant he'd had time to hide the diamonds inside. But how had the bear gotten back to Jessica's apartment? It had been here, at the estate, all night, unless James's mind raced. Someone had been in his house. Someone with access. Someone who could move freely without raising suspicion. He pulled out his phone and called his head of household security. Check the logs. Who entered the guest house last night after 10 p.m.? The answer came back in seconds. No one, sir. The logs show the door wasn't opened after Ms. Harris and her daughter went to bed at 9:30, which meant whoever planted the diamonds had security override codes. Only 3 people had those codes: James himself, his head of security, and his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You're starting to understand, aren't you, Mitchell? But you're too late. James watched as they put Jessica in handcuffs for the second time in 24 hours. Sophie was screaming, trying to run to her mother. Helen had to hold her back. Mama, Mama! Sophie, baby, it's okay. Jessica's voice broke. Be good for Mr. James. Be good, baby. Mama loves you. They put her in the police car. This time, the judge denied bail entirely. The defendant has proven to be a flight risk with evidence in multiple locations. Remanded to custody until trial. Trial was set for 6 months away. 6 months. James stood in the courtroom and watched Jessica look back at him, her eyes hollow with despair. Sophie had collapsed in the gallery, had to be taken to the hospital for shock. Back at the estate, James received another call. The same unknown number. This time, it was a voice digitally altered, impossible to trace. Mitchell, you destroyed my family 20 years ago. You took my father from me. Now I'm taking everything from you. That woman will rot in prison. Her child will grow up in the system, broken and alone, just like I was. And you'll watch it happen, powerless. You'll finally understand what you did to us. And the call disconnected. James stood alone in his office as the sun set over Chicago. On his desk was a framed photo from that morning. Helen had taken it without him noticing. Jessica and Sophie at the breakfast table, laughing. For one brief moment, they'd looked like a family. Now Jessica was in jail. Sophie was in the hospital, traumatized. The media was crucifying him. His board of directors was demanding his resignation. His business partners were fleeing. And somewhere out there, Richard Caldwell and his mysterious partner were watching him fall apart. James had built an empire on control, on strategy, on never showing weakness. But he'd never fought an enemy willing to destroy innocent people just to hurt him. And for the first time in his life, James Mitchell didn't know if he could win. Day 3. Jessica Harris stood in an orange jumpsuit before Judge Catherine Whitmore. her hands shackled, her face gaunt from 2 nights without sleep. The courtroom smelled like old wood and broken dreams. Ms. Harris, given the evidence found in multiple locations, the court finds you a flight risk and a danger to the integrity of this investigation. Bail is denied. You will be remanded to Cook County Women's Correctional Facility pending trial, scheduled for 6 months from today. The gavel fell like a guillotine. Jessica's knees buckled. A bailiff caught her arm. "My daughter," Jessica whispered. "Please, what happens to my daughter?" Judge Whitmore's expression softened fractionally. "Child Protective Services has been notified. A caseworker will—" "No." Jessica's voice broke. "Please, no. She needs me. She's only 5. Remove the defendant." They dragged Jessica from the courtroom while she screamed Sophie's name. James Mitchell sat in the gallery, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. He tried to stand, to say something, to fix this, but Marcus Webb pulled him back down. "There's nothing you can do right now," his lawyer whispered. "Not here." Outside the courthouse, Margaret Torres from Child Protective Services was waiting. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand you've been caring for Sophie Harris temporarily." "Yes, and I'd like to continue." "That won't be possible." Margaret's voice was kind but firm. "You're not a relative. You're not a legal guardian. And frankly, given your connection to the case, to the alleged crime, it would be inappropriate. Sophie knows me. She trusts me. Putting her with strangers will traumatize her further." "Sophie is already traumatized, Mr. Mitchell. What she needs is stability and distance from this situation. We have an excellent foster family who—" "No." James heard the desperation in his own voice and hated it. "Please, that little girl has lost everything. Don't take away the one person she has left." But Margaret was already shaking her head. "I'm sorry. The placement is already arranged. We'll collect Sophie this afternoon." James drove back to the estate in silence. Inside the guest house, Helen was trying to coax Sophie to eat lunch. The child sat at the table, staring at nothing. Mr. Buttons clutched to her chest the bear that had been returned after the police processed it as evidence. "Sophie," James said gently, "can we talk?" She looked up with those enormous eyes. "Is Mama coming home?" James's heart shattered. "Not today, sweetheart. Tomorrow." He knelt beside her chair. "Sophie, some people are going to come this afternoon. Nice people. They're going to take you to stay with a family for a little while." "No." Sophie's scream could have broken glass. "No, I want Mama. I want to stay with you." "I know, sweetheart. I know. But I can't. The law says I can't." "You promised." She was sobbing now, hitting his chest with her small fists. "You promised you'd bring Mama home. You lied." James caught her hands gently. "I'm still trying. Sophie, I'm still fighting, but this is something I can't control." She wrenched away from him and ran to her room, slamming the door. At 3 o'clock, Margaret Torres arrived with a couple named Robert and Linda Chen. They seemed kind, patient, experienced. They'd fostered 17 children over the years. Sophie wouldn't come out of her room. Helen had to carry her to the car, the child screaming and thrashing the entire time. Mr. James, don't let them take me." James stood on his front steps and watched the car drive away. Sophie's tear-stained face pressed against the back window. He'd faced hostile takeovers, bankruptcies, lawsuits that threatened everything he'd built. Nothing had ever hurt like this. That evening, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. William Ross, the vice president, led the charge. "James, this situation with Jessica Harris is destroying the company. Our stock is down 18%. 3 major partners have pulled their contracts. The media is calling us corrupt. You need to step back. Step back." James's voice was dangerous. "Temporarily, until this blows over, let me handle operations for the next few months. You want me to abandon her? Abandon them. I want you to think about the 2,000 employees who depend on this company for their livelihoods. Your personal crusade for a cleaning lady is putting all of them at risk." James looked around the conference table. Faces he'd known for years, some sympathetic, some calculating, all of them afraid. If I step back, Jessica loses her only ally. She'll be convicted. Sophie will be raised by strangers. James. William's voice softened, became almost paternal. You can't save everyone. Sometimes you have to choose. At 6 p.m., James went to the jail to see Jessica. They sat across from each other in a small room, separated by plexiglass. Jessica looked like she'd aged a decade. Her eyes were sunken, her hands trembling. Sophie, she asked immediately. James couldn't lie. They took her to a foster home, a good family. His voice broke. She's asking for you. Jessica closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. This is my fault. I should have been more careful. Should have paid attention when that security guard. This isn't your fault. You were targeted. Set up. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. My baby is with strangers. I'm in here. And you, she looked at him. You should stop, Mr. Mitchell. Stop trying to help me. You're losing everything. Your company, your reputation. It's not worth it. You are worth it. Why? Her voice was almost angry now. Why do you care? You didn't even know me a week ago. I'm nobody. Just another single mother who cleans floors. You're not nobody. James pressed his hand against the glass. You're a mother who raised an incredible daughter on 3 jobs and $400. You're someone who never gave up, never stopped fighting. He stopped, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. You're someone who reminds me what actually matters. Jessica put her hand up to match his, separated by the glass. I can't watch you destroy yourself for me. Too late. I'm already in this. And I don't quit. But as James drove home, he wondered if that was true. His phone rang. The same unknown number. Mitchell. The digitally altered voice was smug. How does it feel watching everything slip through your fingers, unable to save anyone, even yourself? Who are you? James's voice was raw. What do you want? I want you to suffer like my father suffered, like I suffered when you destroyed my family. But I'm willing to make a deal. James pulled over, his heart pounding. What deal? $50 million. A public apology for falsely accusing Thomas Caldwell 20 years ago. An admission that your company engaged in fraud and covered it up? Destroy your reputation, your legacy, everything you've built. And in exchange, a video confession from Richard Caldwell admitting he framed Jessica Harris. She goes free. You get to play the hero, but your empire burns. James closed his eyes. If I don't, Jessica serves 15 to 20 years. Sophie grows up in the system, and you get to live with the knowledge that you could have saved them but chose your pride instead. You have 24 hours. The line went dead. James sat in his car on the side of the road as night fell over Chicago. He thought about his company. 2,000 employees. Families depending on those paychecks. 30 years of building something from nothing. He thought about Jessica in that cell, broken and alone. He thought about Sophie's face in the back window of that car, screaming his name, and he made his decision. James Mitchell hadn't slept in 48 hours. He sat in his study, staring at 2 documents on his desk. The first, a wire transfer authorization for $50 million. The second, a statement his lawyers had drafted a public confession that Mitchell Properties had engaged in fraud 20 years ago. That Thomas Caldwell had been wrongfully accused. That James Mitchell was a liar who'd destroyed an innocent man to cover corporate crimes. Every word was false. But signing it would free Jessica. His phone rang. William Ross. James, the board voted. If you don't resign by Monday, we're removing you as CEO. You're destroying the company. 2,000 people are going to lose their jobs because you're obsessed with a woman you barely know. She's innocent, William. Innocent or not, she's not worth bankrupting the company. Think about the families that depend on us. The people who've worked here for decades. Are you really willing to sacrifice all of them? James hung up without answering. He thought about his employees. Sarah in accounting, who'd just had her 3rd child. Marcus in maintenance, supporting his elderly mother. The hundreds of others whose names he didn't know but whose livelihoods depended on the company staying afloat. If he destroyed Mitchell Properties' reputation, the company would collapse, contracts would evaporate, investors would flee. Those 2,000 people would be unemployed by Christmas. But if he didn't pay, Jessica would rot in prison. Sophie would grow up without her mother, damaged and alone. There was no right choice, only degrees of wrong. At midnight, James drove to the foster home where Sophie was staying. Robert Chen answered the door, surprised. "Mr. Mitchell, it's very late. I need to see her, just for 5 minutes. Please." Robert hesitated, then nodded. "She's not sleeping anyway." Sophie was sitting on a twin bed in a small, neat room decorated with cartoon animals. She was wearing pajamas that weren't hers, holding Mr. Buttons, staring at nothing. When she saw James, her face crumpled. "You came back. I'll always come back, sweetheart." James sat on the edge of the bed. "Where's Mama?" Still where she was. "But I'm working on it." "You said you'd fix it." Her voice was so small. "You said you'd bring her home." "I know. And I'm trying. But Sophie, I need to ask you something. It's going to sound strange." "Okay." She nodded. "Do you remember that night you walked through the snow to find your mama? You were so scared, so cold, but you kept walking. Why?" Sophie looked at him like the answer was obvious. "Because Mama needed me." "You could have stayed inside, where it was warm and safe, but Mama was alone." Such simple logic, such pure courage. "What if helping Mama meant losing something important?" James asked quietly. "What if you had to give up something you really loved to save her?" Sophie didn't hesitate. "I'd give it up. Mama's more important than anything." James felt something crystallize in his chest. A 5-year-old child had walked through a blizzard, risking her life, because her mother needed her. And here he sat, a billionaire with every resource in the world, calculating whether saving Jessica was worth the cost. He'd become exactly what his ex-wife had accused him of being, a man who measured everything in terms of profit and loss, who'd forgotten what it meant to love someone more than you loved your own security. "Sophie," James said, pulling her into a hug, "your mama is very lucky to have you, and I'm going to bring her home. I promise. A real promise this time. Even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard." He left the foster home at 1 a.m. and drove to David Brennan's office. David was waiting, looking exhausted. "Please tell me you're not actually considering paying these people." "I'm considering it. James, if you destroy your reputation, you lose everything. The company collapses. You'll be ruined. And what guarantee do you have they'll actually release the evidence?" "None. But what choice do I have?" David slammed his hand on the desk. "The choice to fight back. These people are criminals. They framed an innocent woman. They tried to kidnap a child. And now they're extorting you. You don't negotiate with that. You destroy it." "How?" "We don't even know who we're fighting. Richard Caldwell is in the wind. His partner is a ghost. Then we make them come to us." David leaned forward. "You call them back. Tell them you'll pay. But you demand to see proof first. You demand a face-to-face meeting." They're not stupid enough. They're arrogant enough. They think they've won. They think you're broken. Use that. David pulled out a small device. FBI-grade recording equipment. Undetectable. You get them talking. You get a confession. You nail them. James shook his head. "And if it fails, if they just take the money and run, then you're no worse off than if you'd surrendered. But at least you'll have tried." James thought about Sophie's words. Even if it's hard, especially if it's hard. He pulled out his phone and dialed the unknown number. It rang 4 times. Then the digitally altered voice. "Mitchell, have you made your decision? I'll pay $100 million, and I'll make the statement. But I want proof the confession exists. I want to see Richard Caldwell's face when he admits what he did. Silence. Then, you want to meet in person? I want to look you in the eye. I want to know who destroyed Jessica Harris. If I'm going to burn my life down, I deserve to know why. More silence. James could almost hear the calculation happening. Fine. Tomorrow night, 10 p.m. The old shipping warehouse at Pier 7. Come alone. Bring the money in cash. Try anything clever. And the confession gets deleted forever. Jessica Harris dies in prison. I'll be there. James hung up and looked at David. Now what? Now we set the trap. The warehouse at Pier 7 had been abandoned for 3 years. Broken windows stared like empty eye sockets across the black water of Lake Michigan. The wind off the lake cut through James's coat as he stepped out of his car at 9:47 p.m. In the trunk, a silver briefcase containing $100 million. Except it wasn't. The top layer, maybe 2 inches, was real cash. Beneath that cut newspaper, carefully arranged to match the weight and bulk of currency, David Brennan's idea. If they open it to check, they'll see real money on top. David had said that morning, by the time they realize it's fake, we'll have what we need. James wore a wire so small it was sewn into the button of his shirt. David and a hand-picked FBI team were positioned in 3 locations around the warehouse. Radio silence. Waiting. The plan was simple. Get the blackmailer talking. Get a confession on tape. Signal the team. Make the arrest. But plans had a way of falling apart. James walked toward the warehouse entrance, briefcase in hand. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Inside, the space was cavernous old shipping containers stacked like metal coffins, shadows pooling in every corner. A single light burned in the center of the space, a camping lantern on a rusted oil drum. James walked toward it. That's far enough. The voice came from the shadows to his left. Not digitally altered this time. Natural. Familiar. James's blood turned to ice. William Ross stepped into the light, a smile playing at his lips. He wore an expensive suit, the kind he always wore to board meetings. In his right hand, he held a pistol with casual confidence. Surprised? William's voice was almost cheerful. You shouldn't be. I've been planning this for 2 years. James's mind raced. William Ross, his vice president, a man he'd worked with for 25 years, a man he'd trusted. You're working with Richard Caldwell. Working with Nomad James. Richard works for me. He's been my employee since the day I hired him 8 years ago. William circled slowly, like a predator enjoying the hunt. Did you really think some grief-stricken son just happened to get a job with you? That was me. I found Richard, told him who you were, what you'd done to his father. I spent 3 years turning his pain into a weapon. Why? The word came out hoarse. 25 years, James. I gave you 25 years. I built this company as much as you did more. Actually, I handled operations while you played celebrity CEO. I closed deals while you took credit. I made you billions. William's voice hardened. And what did I get? A salary, a title, a pat on the head. While you got the magazine covers, the awards, the legend. So this is about ego. This is about what I'm owed. William's shout echoed off the metal walls. I was going to wait, build my case slowly, take the company legitimately. But then you started sniffing around the diamond shipment, asking questions about inventory. I had to accelerate. The diamonds. You stole them. I borrowed them from a client who trusted Mitchell Properties with their security. $8 million in merchandise, and I knew exactly how to make them disappear. William smiled. But I needed a scapegoat, someone disposable. Jessica Harris was perfect poor, powerless. No one who'd believe her. Richard planted the evidence. We were done. Clean. Until I got involved. Until you developed a conscience. William's voice dripped contempt. The great James Mitchell, saving the damsel in distress. It was almost touching, but you know what? It worked out better, because now I get everything. The company, the money, and the satisfaction of watching you lose the woman and child you tried to save. James kept his voice steady. The board won't just hand you the company. They already did. Emergency vote yesterday. You've been removed as CEO. I'm in charge now. Effective immediately. William's smile widened. All that's left is for you to disappear. Tragic accident. Depressed billionaire. Reputation in ruins. Drowns himself in Lake Michigan. Very sad. James's hand tightened on the briefcase. The money. Oh, I'll take that. But first, William gestured with the gun. Open it. Let's make sure you're not stupid enough to try something. This was the moment. The plan was falling apart. James set the briefcase down and popped the latches. He lifted the lid slowly, tilting it so William could see the stacks of bills on top. Satisfied, William stepped closer, gun still trained on James, and reached for a stack of bills. He riffled through it all, real. Reached for another, also real. Then his fingers went deeper. Newspaper. William's face went cold. You're even more foolish than I thought. He raised the gun to James's head. Wait. James held up his hands. You haven't told me how you did it. How you got into my estate to plant the diamonds in Sophie's bear. William laughed. You still haven't figured it out. I've had access to your security systems for years. I'm on the authorized list. I walked in at midnight, took the bear from the child's room, planted the diamonds, walked out. Your cameras showed nothing unusual because I'm authorized personnel. So Richard was just your tool, the angry son, the perfect weapon. Richard was useful, but ultimately, he was weak, too much conscience. Started having second thoughts about the child. William shook his head. Sentiment is weakness. James, you taught me that. Remember, never let emotions cloud business judgment. Those were your exact words when you destroyed Thomas Caldwell. I was wrong. Yes, you were. And now you'll pay for it. William's finger tightened on the trigger. The warehouse door crashed open. Step away from him. FBI agents poured in from 3 entrances, weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through the darkness. William spun, gun swinging wild. A figure tackled him from the side. Richard Caldwell. The 2 men crashed into a shipping container. The gun skittered across the concrete floor. James dove for it. William was faster, kicking Richard away, lunging for the weapon. His fingers closed around the grip. He rolled, aimed at James's chest. Richard threw himself between them. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Richard Caldwell's body jerked. His eyes went wide. A bloom of red spread across his white shirt. He collapsed. The gun clattered from William's hands as FBI agents tackled him to the ground. James dropped to his knees beside Richard. Don't move. Don't medical. We need medical. Richard's breath came in wet gasps. Blood pooled beneath him. His eyes found James's face. I'm sorry, Richard whispered. My father. He did steal. You were right to report him. I couldn't see it. 20 years of hate and I. His breath hitched. The girl, Sophie. She reminded me of me. After my father died, I couldn't let her. Save your strength. James pressed his hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. You're going to be okay. But Richard's eyes were already glassing over. Tell her. Tell Jessica. I'm sorry. His breath stopped. David Brennan appeared at James's shoulder, pulling him back as paramedics rushed in. Is he? James couldn't finish. David nodded grimly. Across the warehouse, FBI agents were reading William Ross his rights. The recording device had captured everything: the confession, the theft, the conspiracy, the attempted murder. James's hands were covered in Richard Caldwell's blood. The man who'd tried to destroy Jessica, who'd kidnapped Sophie, who'd planted evidence and lied and schemed. The man who'd taken a bullet meant for James Mitchell. We got it all, David said quietly. William's confession. Everything. Jessica will be released by morning. James looked at Richard's body, covered now with a sheet. He saved my life. He also tried to ruin it. I know. James's voice was hollow. But in the end, he chose differently. He chose to be better than his hate. As the ambulance took Richard's body away and the FBI led William Ross out in handcuffs, James stood in the empty warehouse and thought about choices. Thomas Caldwell had made bad choices. James had been ruthless in response. Richard had chosen revenge. William had chosen greed. And at the end, Richard had chosen redemption, even if it cost him everything. The call came at 6 a.m. James was still at the FBI field office, giving his statement for the fourth time, when Marcus Webb burst through the door. It's done. The prosecutor is filing for immediate dismissal of all charges against Jessica Harris. She'll be released within the hour. James felt his knees weaken. He'd been running on adrenaline and coffee for 36 hours straight. His hands were still stained with Richard Caldwell's blood. He'd tried to wash them 3 times, but he could still see it under his fingernails. And William, federal custody. They're charging him with theft, conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and about 15 other counts. David's recording captured everything. He'll die in prison. Marcus paused. James, you need to go to the hospital. You look like hell. I need to see Jessica first. By 7 a.m., James was standing outside Cook County Women's Correctional Facility. The sky was gray with winter clouds, but to him it looked beautiful. Jessica walked out wearing the same clothes she'd been arrested in 4 days ago, jeans and a sweater, both wrinkled beyond recognition. She was so thin, so pale. When she saw James, she stopped walking. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the parking lot. Then Jessica ran. She crashed into him so hard they both nearly fell. She was sobbing into his chest, her whole body shaking. Sophie, she gasped. Where's Sophie? Is she okay? Did they? She's safe. She's at the foster home. We can go get her right now. Jessica pulled back, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. You did it. You actually did it. They told me William Ross confessed. That Richard... Her voice caught. That Richard died saving you. James nodded, unable to speak. I never thought, after everything he did, he chose to be better than his hate, James said quietly. In the end, that's what mattered. They drove to the foster home in silence. Jessica couldn't stop crying. James kept his eyes on the road, afraid that if he looked at her, he'd fall apart. Robert Chen opened the door, smiling. Ms. Harris, we've been expecting you. Where is she? Jessica's voice trembled. In the playroom. She's been asking for you every 5 minutes since we told her you were coming. Jessica didn't wait. She ran down the hallway, following the sound of a child's laughter, and burst into a room filled with toys and sunlight. Sophie was sitting at a small table, coloring. When she looked up and saw her mother, the crayon fell from her hand. Mama, baby. Jessica dropped to her knees. Mama's here. Mama's home. Sophie stared for 1 more second, as if afraid this was a dream. Then she launched herself across the room. They collided in the middle of the floor, both of them crying so hard they couldn't breathe. Jessica held her daughter like she'd never let go, pressing kisses into her hair, whispering, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Mama's here. Mama's never leaving again. Sophie clutched her mother's neck. You came back, Mr. James said you would, but I was scared. I know, baby, I know. But it's over now. We're okay. James stood in the doorway, watching them. Robert Chen appeared beside him. That's what it's all about, isn't it? The foster father said quietly. Moments like this. James nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Eventually, Sophie noticed him. Mr. James. She ran over and grabbed his hand, pulling him into the reunion. Suddenly, James was kneeling on the floor with them, and Sophie had her arms around both him and Jessica, and they were all crying together. You kept your promise, Sophie whispered into his shoulder. You brought Mama home. 3 hours later, after paperwork and signatures and official releases, they drove to James's estate. Jessica sat in the front seat, holding Sophie in her lap, even though it wasn't technically safe. She couldn't bear to let her daughter go. What happens now? Jessica asked as they pulled through the gates. Now, James glanced at her. Now you rest, recover, figure out what you want to do next. I can't stay at your estate forever. Why not? Jessica laughed, the sound startled and slightly hysterical. Because I'm your employee. Because this is crazy. Because you think you don't belong here. James pulled the car to a stop in front of the main house. Jessica, you and Sophie have been through hell because of me. Because someone wanted to hurt me and used you to do it. The least I can do is make sure you're safe and taken care of. It's not your fault. I know. But I'm still responsible. And besides, he turned to look at her fully. I don't want you to leave. Sophie, who'd been quiet, suddenly piped up. Can we stay? Mama? Please, I like it here. And Mr. James is nice. And Helen makes good pancakes. Jessica looked at her daughter, then at James. You're serious? I'm serious. The house manager position is still open. $80,000 a year, full benefits, housing included. You'd be doing me a favor. The domestic staff has been chaos since my last manager quit. I don't know anything about managing a household staff. You managed to raise an incredible daughter on 3 jobs and $400 in the bank. I think you can handle a few maids and a cook. Jessica bit her lip, tears threatening again. Why are you doing this? James was quiet for a moment. Then, because 4 days ago, I stood in a warehouse and almost died, and all I could think about was you and Sophie, not my company, not my reputation, not my empire, just... He stopped, his voice rough. Just the fact that I might never see you again, that Sophie might grow up thinking I'd abandoned you. And I realized that for the first time in my entire adult life, I cared about something more than I cared about winning. Jessica stared at him. James, you don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to be safe and happy. And if that means staying here, then stay. If it means I set you up in an apartment across town with a different job, I'll do that too. Whatever you need. Sophie looked between them with the uncanny wisdom of children. Mama, I think Mr. James likes us. Jessica laughed, wiping her eyes. I think you're right, baby. Do you like him? Jessica met James's eyes across the car. Yeah, I do. Then we should stay. Sophie's logic was unassailable. That evening, Jessica and Sophie moved back into the guest house. Helen had prepared it beautifully fresh flowers, clean sheets. Sophie's room filled with new toys to replace the ones lost in the chaos. While Sophie explored her room, Jessica stood on the small porch, looking at the main house where lights were coming on as evening fell. James was in there somewhere, probably working, probably exhausted. He'd sacrificed everything to save her. His reputation. His company, though Marcus had said the board was already begging him to come back. He'd put himself in the line of fire, literally, for her, for Sophie. Jessica had spent her whole life believing she had to fight alone, that asking for help was weakness, that trusting anyone but herself was dangerous, but James Mitchell had proven her wrong. The door to the main house opened. James stepped out, saw her standing there, and walked across the lawn. Everything okay? He asked. Everything's... Jessica stopped, found herself crying again. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. You almost died. Richard did die. William, your vice president, he tried to kill you. All because of me. Not because of you. because of hate, because of greed, because of choices other people made. James stepped closer. You didn't ask for any of this. Jessica, you were just trying to survive, to give your daughter a life, and you got caught in someone else's war. Still nothing. You and Sophie, you reminded me what actually matters, not buildings or bank accounts or business deals. People, love, family. He smiled tiredly. You saved me as much as I saved you. Jessica looked at this man, this billionaire who'd walked through fire for her and made a decision. She stepped forward and kissed him. It was brief, gentle, more promise than passion. When she pulled back, James looked stunned. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Before he could respond, Sophie's voice rang out from the guest house. Mama, come see, my new room has a window seat. Jessica laughed, wiping her eyes. I should go. Be with your daughter. We have time. As Jessica walked back to the guest house, James stood in the twilight and thought about time, about second chances, about how sometimes the worst moments of your life led to the best ones. Richard Caldwell had died seeking redemption. William Ross would die in prison, consumed by his own bitterness. But Jessica and Sophie were alive, safe, home. And James Mitchell, for the first time in 30 years, knew what home felt like. 1 year later, James Mitchell stood in his living room on Thanksgiving morning, watching Jessica teach Sophie how to set a proper table. The guest house had been abandoned months ago. They lived in the main house now, as a family. Jessica wore an engagement ring, simple, elegant, chosen together. The wedding was planned for spring. Sophie, now 6, chattered about her new school, her friends, her upcoming role in the Christmas pageant. The trauma had faded, replaced by security and love. James had learned what his ex-wife had tried to tell him years ago. Success without people to share it with is just expensive loneliness. His company had recovered. His reputation was restored. But none of it mattered as much as the sound of Sophie's laughter or the feel of Jessica's hand in his. They'd invited 50 people to Thanksgiving dinner, employees, former foster families, even Margaret Torres from Child Protective Services. David Brennan was coming. Marcus Webb and his family. A true family. Built not from blood but from choice. Jessica had been wrongly accused, nearly destroyed by a system that failed her. But she'd survived. They'd survived. Sometimes justice requires sacrifice. Sometimes love means risking everything. And sometimes, the family you choose becomes stronger than the one you're born into. Have you ever been wrongly accused like Jessica, where everyone believed the evidence against you? How did you fight back?